Hello all, this is Gopinath from Cygnet. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. This is a series of webinar in our SharePoint section, and earlier we have done SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint 2013 migration webinar. This is SharePoint workflow migration from SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint 2013, and I'd like to give a brief introduction about Cygnet Infotech. We are a global IT service and solution provider. We are serving clients across 23 countries. We are known for three things. Our quality has been certified by ISO 9001. Our information security has been certified by ISO 27001. And our reliability has been certified by CMMI level 3. And you can learn about our other partnership and creditability in our website, cygnet-infotech.com. A small brief about two of our products, TestingWiz. It is an automation testing tool to test any web or desktop or mobile automation testing. So you can find more detail in testing-wiz.com. And M1 is an enterprise order system providing a range of smartphone based ordering apps applicable for B2B, retail, restaurant and catalog companies. You can find more details on my-m1.com. And I got my colleague Mr. Jai Mehta, who is our SharePoint consultant and MCT. He'll be taking forward about this webinar with all of you. We like to be an interactive session, so after the presentation you can shoot your questions and we can reply on it. Thank you.
Hello everybody. First of all, I would like to thank you to everyone to joining this webinar, and I hope that this is going to be the very interactive session at the end of this webinar once we have reached to the question and answer session. So first of all, I would like to start with the objectives of this webinar. Particularly we'll start with the experiences which we have faced while we have performed the SharePoint workflow migration, particularly moving from SharePoint 2010 to 2013. Along with that, I would like to go through with the migration step and methodology that we have followed. It's a general and strategic methodology which is being availed by Microsoft itself. Then after, we'll consider the three different categories of workflows exist in the SharePoint environment. The steps basically to migrate your SharePoint out of the box workflows. The keys to migrate the SharePoint Designer workflows. The challenges what we have faced while we are migrating the SharePoint custom workflows. The custom workflows will be covered in the prospect of SharePoint Designer workflows as well as the Visual Studio based like code solution based workflows. After that, we'll focus on to the migration of Visual Studio solution as well as the workflow migration itself, and the later the new feature which is been available into the SharePoint 2013, the workflow manager, who is managing the whole workflow execution inside it. So we'll discuss all these objective points into the details, and followed by we'll have a question and answer session to raise and answer your questions or queries. Okay, so here I will start with the experiences. So here I have considered a couple of cases where we have a one production and manufacturing firm. For that, these three basic workflows have been considered and they have been used into the routine. I think it is not more important to the domain or any industry, because this type of workflows may exist in any of the domain and even in the industry as well. Now, considering the out-of-the-box workflow, so document review and approval workflow is nowadays is a very common, and it is important in terms of team collaboration. Along with that, the another case I have picked here, that is the leave request approval workflow, which is designed into the SharePoint Designer, which basically holds the only single level of approval of the reporting manager of concerned employee, and based on the approval or rejection, the notification will be sent to the requester and the other stakeholders basically who are involved while taking care of the leave request, particularly with the HR department and the admin department. Along with that, we'll discuss the webinar in terms of more details with respect to this case studies on of the workflows. Even the one more Visual Studio based workflow that I have picked here for the coworker required approval workflow. So basically this is a custom workflow which includes a two-stage of approval. So I would like to give you a little brief about this workflow, means how this workflow works actually. So basically it is starting with the request of my teammate. If I would like to add another teammate with my team, so I can raise the request to my project leader or project manager, and based on that the approval that approved first stage will be sent to the senior reporting managers. So that basically taking care of all about the cost and budgets, and based on that approval then HR will start the another workflow for the job description, and based on that they start finding the coworker for the consent request. So this is how the two stage of approvals being considered for the Visual Studio workflow. We'll take it into the further like the migration methodology, basically what we have followed. This migration methodology have been discussed in our earlier webinar, where we have only focused on the SharePoint migration only. But now as we are focusing only workflows, so before we move to the actual workflow strategies, we'd like to just brief you about the migration methodology, what we have followed and availed by Microsoft. So basically whenever you are migrating from one or existing edition to the newer edition of any application, in case of SharePoint, so these are the 5 steps that you need to take into your mind. Start with your plan, then prepare, test, implement, and then validate. If you have to talk about the plan, so first of all you need to find out the feasibility of your existing infrastructure of SharePoint 2010, and based on that you need to prepare a checklist. So that will lead you to the prepare stage of the migration. Along with the preparation, you need to prepare the identical environment for your SharePoint Server 2013. So for example, if I have to say, if I have a 2 web front-end server, 1 application server, and 1 SQL server which exists on SharePoint Server 2010, so similar type of infrastructure I need to prepare for the migration of SharePoint Server 2013. Along with that, I need to test some various scenarios, like when you have the custom code involved, so you need to identify and verify your compatibility between your 2 versions, because in SharePoint 2013 some of the features of SharePoint 2010 have been deprecated, so you need to ensure that stability and compatibility, and if the stability or compatibility is not matched with your expectations, so in that case you need to again go with other customization cost, and you need to consider that cost as well. Then after, you need to start implementing your migration. So here I would like to recommend a few points, particularly with the do not try to attempt the migration on the production server. It is better that you perform some migration cycles, like at least 1 or 2 at least. So in that case it gives you more confidence about your migration and what issues basically you are facing during the migration, that will be identified on the implemented stage. So it is better that we do this test on our test or staging servers of migration, and then after it is better to move to your production. And later stage, on the last stage of this migration, that is the validation. So to validate your migration, it is possible with the best business users can test your upgraded migration. Before that, you may need the scenario, like you may need to train your business users to deal with the SharePoint Server 2013, and then after they can report the issues. But it is better that before you move and give this a kind of a beta testing to your business users, it is important that you should verify the ULS logs of SharePoint as well as their Windows log for any major issues when encountered while the migration has been performed. So this is what the basic and straightforward migration methodology has been followed for this migration, and during this migration we have considered the workflow migration specially. Going ahead with the objectives of this webinar, the steps to migrate the out-of-box workflows. So first of all, I would like to let you know that migrating the out-of-box workflows in the SharePoint is not a big rocket science. It's just a simple, you migrate your content databases from SharePoint Server 2010 to SharePoint Server 2013, and your out-of-box workflows will be migrated. but few things need to be care what basically we have encountered and some issues with our customers, so I would like to share with you. In terms of steps, the initially you may need to set up the Windows Server infrastructure with SQL Server and the SharePoint Server 2013 form. Along with that, the further steps, you need to take the copy of your content databases which are in the SharePoint 2010 and put them into the SharePoint 2013 for migration purpose. So ultimately you can consider the backup and restore scenario. So take the backup of your SharePoint 2010 content databases and restore them to your targeted SQL server, which is going to be used for SharePoint Server 2013. Along with that, you may need to create the SharePoint 13 web applications. Now here the one point need to be taken consider as like if the SharePoint Server 2010 web application is basically configured with the classic authentication, so in that case you need to switch it to the claims authentication by putting some commandlets of the PowerShell. So you need to configure your web application before migrating to the SharePoint 2013. It has to be claim aware, because in SharePoint 2013 while you create the web application, it is only supports and sorry, not only the supports, but it's the default mode would be the claims authentication. After that, you need to attach your content databases to your web application, and then after you need to start the upgrade command with to upgrade your content databases. So ultimately it will upgrade the schema of your content databases. After doing that, the migration will not be completed so far. Means like, as you might be aware that the SharePoint 2013 supports two modes of SharePoint. Like it supports the backward compatibility, so it supports the SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013 as well. So while you do this migration, means particularly when you fire the upgrade command of PowerShell, so at the time the migration will not be totally completed. You may need to go with another round of migration that we call as a deferred site collection upgrade method. So basically that is the responsible to move your complete UI and look and feel to be converted into the SharePoint 2013 from SharePoint 2010. After doing that, your migration will be completed and you have been completely moved to the SharePoint 2013. Now the drawback over here is like once you done with the deferred site collection upgrade, then after you cannot go back. So your revert operation is not possible once you move to completely with SharePoint 2013. And there's a last step, like it's just optional, but you need to ensure and verify that your SharePoint out of the box workflow feature is activated, because sometimes it happens you migrate from your older version of SharePoint, means SharePoint 2010, and move to the SharePoint 2013. It could be the scenario the workflow features are not getting activated, and your business user will start looking to initiate the workflows, and they even find the workflows on their screen of the SharePoint. So to avoid these circumstances, you need to ensure and verify your SharePoint out of the box workflow feature is activated. Even though sometimes it could happen, what we have faced, like in the recent scenario with one of the customer, that despite you are activating your SharePoint out of the box workflow feature, the workflows are still not getting populated while configuring. So to do that tweak, we have identified what is going and what is happening behind the screen. So after looking after the logs and all, we have identified that some of the hidden lists which are correlated and responsible for workflows configuration, they have been not properly migrated from SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint 2013. So in that case, we need to restore them once again, particularly with those lists, and after that, once you start again enabling your SharePoint out of the box workflow feature, it has start working as expected. So basically here in the workflow migration, particularly with the out of the box, there is no such big challenges are been identified so far, but it is all the points are need to be taken care while you are doing the migration, and particularly in terms of workflows. The next topic about the migrating SharePoint Designer workflows. Now here are some important notes has to be taken care. So that's why we are talking in terms of keys. Like the SharePoint Designer 13 is been now totally changed, particularly for the workflows. Now few of the actions have been deprecated for SharePoint Designer 2013 and the SharePoint Workflow 2013 as well. Along with that, some new features have been also promoted. One more thing, like you might be surprised, like there is no visual representation of SharePoint Designer workflows available in the SharePoint Designer. This is being considered by taking care of your SharePoint Designer can connect with Office 365. So like you can have a single application or tool of SharePoint Designer can be connected with your on-premise of SharePoint as well as the online version of the SharePoint. So similarly, there are some other stuff have been changed so far. So we'll discuss them in much detail. So we'll start with the keys. So basically, as the SharePoint 2013 supports the two versions like SharePoint Server 2010 features as well as the SharePoint Server 2013. So the same things has been replicated and available in the workflow case. So basically you can author your workflows in SharePoint 2010 as well as in SharePoint 2013. So like when you start creating the workflows, it allows you to select the option to create the workflow in SharePoint 2010 or SharePoint 2013. Basically it negotiates between the two versions of SharePoint, as I just said. So your workflow will be in the SharePoint 2010 and the new service has been introduced that is called AWS, that is Azure Workflow Services, which is now dealing with the SharePoint 2013 workflows. If in terms of the advantages of SharePoint Designer 2013, so basically now it started to support the stages and the loops. Now if you can recall the earlier version of SharePoint Designers like 2007 and 2010, so stages and the loops cannot be created. Particularly with the loops, like for that the loop concept was not available in the previous versions of SharePoint Designer. So now from SharePoint Designer 13 the loop concept is now available. Even though some limitations were there with SharePoint Designer, so you cannot invoke even your own custom code. So now you can also consider your custom code can be invoked within your Designer workflows. Basically you can call and consume your custom code by calling the web services, WCF services, and in response you may have the REST and JSON responses available. So like you can consume the data of the workflow evolution or your custom code evolution through REST APIs, and you may have the JSON response can be available to extract your information. To do so, there is one more action is available in SharePoint Designer that will comes to the later stage, particularly to extract the values of the JSON response in terms of dictionary. So it would be easier to manipulate the dictionary if we consider the standard .NET structure. Another thing in particular case of the email editor. So earlier versions of SharePoint Designer, the email editor was not quite effective to drawing out your desired templates for your email purpose, and whenever you are sending an email, so you need to do lots of work with the email editor to draw your desired template. So now the rich email editor is available and it is enhanced with a couple of formatting and injecting existing template capabilities. So you can now consume this feature in your workflows and you can put out your all the template based emails along with it. So basically these are the requires, like in our case if we have to talk about the leave request management workflow. So in that case we need put the company header and footer with the specific template are available for the leave request. So that type of application form we have created, and in between of that, so we have enhanced the template in such a way that, so like if you take a printout, so it can be considered as a hard copies of and can be stored for your reference in further future of the leave request. Now, as I have just mentioned that about the SharePoint 2013 Designer can work with the SharePoint 2010 workflows and SharePoint 13 workflows. So in case of SharePoint 2010 workflows, how it is possible? So it is possible through SharePoint Workflow Interop in action. So Interoping is available in the SharePoint Designer 2013, particularly to consume and execute your SharePoint 2010 workflows. Sometimes you may have the scenario, or if you would like to take the leverage of SharePoint 2013 workflow capabilities, and if you do not want to lose your existing workflow capabilities which you have developed in SharePoint 2010, so you can invoke the a workflow as a child from the SharePoint 2013 workflow as well. As you can see in the screen, the images basically represents the two components are now available in the SharePoint 2013. So like we'll come to that point later stage when we start the discussing the workflow manager. Particularly the SharePoint 2013 and the workflow manager are the now separate entities in SharePoint 2013. So your workflows will be basically managed, hosted, and processed in the workflow manager itself. So now your workflows will no longer run into the SharePoint 2013 environment. But your SharePoint 20, if we look at the SharePoint 2010, so they basically that workflow feature, and it is basically built upon the workflow foundation 3.5. So your all workflows will be hosted over there. So in the case if you have to consider, I have my SharePoint 2013 workflow instance to be run. So basically it will start running from the workflow manager. So as you can start that the A is been denoted there where it is starting to executing the SharePoint 2013 workflow. Then it proceeds with a couple of actions, and then once it reaches to the number 3 stage, so now it has identified that there is a one workflow in SharePoint 2010 is need to be invoked. So kind of a action has been defined over there. So after that it will send back that response to the SharePoint 2013, and it will tell that now it has to run the SharePoint 2010 workflow instance. So once the SharePoint 2010 workflow instance getting started, so all those defined actions and activities will be performed and carried out during that workflow execution, and whatever the response has been there, that will be sent back to the SharePoint 2013 workflow instance as a back direction of the coming from the D to 3 of the workflow manager. And then after the workflow gets completed, so sometimes it could be scenario like you start or initiate your workflow from SharePoint 2013 and it could complete with the SharePoint 2010 workflow itself as well, based on that wait state how you have configured. So this is how you can execute your workflows in SharePoint 2013 for workflows will define in the SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013. As we have discussed about the couple of new activities in the past few slides, so I would like to give you focus on them. So and basically how we have configured and consumed over here. If you can notice the highlighted one, that is the call HTTP web service. So basically you can use this activity call HTTP web service, and in terms of its action, it allows you to put the URL which web service you would like to invoke, even though the return type can be configured over there, like in terms of what type of request or response type will be retrieved. So basically you can perform the various different operations by considering the HTTP request mode by putting and setting their get, post, put, delete, merge operation, and you can also have the response type in JSON as well. Along with that, you can just see the build dictionary. So if you're retrieving your response in JSON, so you can bring those response to the dictionary. Your complete dictionary object will be calculated, and you can extract the dictionary from that activity, and you can take appropriate business decision on it, and your workflow moves ahead. Along with that, some couple of new activities are available. If you just see the fourth row of the activities and consider the last two actions, like start a list workflow and start a site workflow. So here it allows you to initiate your list workflows and site workflows from workflow itself. So that means a parent workflow can call and initiate the another child workflow, as many as you would like to, but make sure about your existing load of the system. The start a list workflow, basically you can target your SharePoint 2010 workflow as well, and similarly you can consider your site workflow as well. Along with that, some few additional activities are also exist, like translate document and set workflow status as well. So translate document basically correlated with the translation service of SharePoint Server 2013. So basically it is responsible to translate your document into the couple of multiple languages, as well as the set workflow status. So you can state your workflow, set your workflow status from the activities, and you can keep notifying your workflow owners to how the workflow have been reached so far. So particularly like you are managing your status of the workflow. So these are the various activities and actions been defined in the SharePoint Designer 2013. Now, as we have talked about, the SharePoint Designer is now having some enhancement and some limitations, but the limitations are not that much affecting your development or any restricting any business user to define any creating any elements into the SharePoint. Now, SharePoint Designer workflows comes with a stage. So now there is a one business rule of SharePoint Designer workflow. You must need to create the stage. Means your SharePoint Designer workflow must have at least one stage to be exist. Stage is nothing but it's kind of have the entry point and the gate. The entry point will consider and starts with the action, or you can say step, and the gate is basically it's a condition from where it evaluates the outcome of it, your stage, and based on that it moves further and execute your workflow into the further steps or stages. Your stage can be have a multiple steps, and basically this stage logic is come out and mitigates the loop limitation of SharePoint Designer. Now, if we talk about the loops, so there are two types of loops you can create over here. Same as like the Visual Studio allows it to create consider the while activity. So here the loop is coming in the two way. One is the finite number of iterations, so you can consider the loop for number, and another is the loop while, so like until some condition met, the workflow and the logic whatever written inside it will be continuously working it. Along with that, one more advice to be I would like to say here, that is the if you are looking to migrate your complete SharePoint Designer workflows from 2010 to 2013, so like if you would like to implement this looping, if you would like to consider and consume more other exciting activities, so in that case you need to rewrite your complete designer workflow for SharePoint 2013. So like your 2010 workflow will not have this type of features available because it will run in the Interop action mode. So you need to rewrite your whole workflow in SharePoint Designer 2013 if you would like to totally migrate from 2010 workflow to 2013 workflow. So this is what the kind of a just illustrative screen of the SharePoint Designer 2013. So while you are creating the list workflow, for example, so here you can see it asks for the platform type, where and how to which list you would like to attach your workflow in mode of SharePoint 2010 or SharePoint 2013. Next, we will talk about the challenges. The challenges while we have faced while migrating the SharePoint custom workflows. So basically the challenges are nothing but correlating with the SharePoint Designer workflows and the SharePoint workflows which are created using Visual Studio. So like codeless and with code solutions. Now, as we all aware that SharePoint Designer, you can inject the custom activities along with it. So sometimes it may be the scenario, if I have to consider our scenario, so where we have the requirement that we need to fax the documents to the concerned stakeholder. So in that case we need to define the custom activity, and we have consumed the third-party API to send fax to the concerned number of the fax machine. So for that we need to write down the complete activity back to consume these new features of SharePoint 2013. So ultimately we need to rewrite the complete solution for SharePoint workflow activities. So this is going to be the challenge. So your existing custom activity may not work with your new environment of SharePoint Server 2013 and SharePoint Designer 2013. In talk of the custom flow forms, so sometimes the associated forms are there with the workflows, while it is providing the flexibility to user to put their own responses in during the workflow stages going on. So if we need to talk about the initiation forms and the association forms, so basically in SharePoint Designer 2013, or even you can consider into the Visual Studio, your forms are basically general.aspx pages. So for InfoPath forms you may need to configure them separately, and along with that you may also need to ensure that your InfoPath forms should compatible with your new environment, because sometimes it could be the scenario your Infopart 2010 forms could not support with Infopart 2013. So in that case, you again need to upgrade your Infopart forms, and you may need to again resubmit them. If you are just considering the forms library, you may need to consider them in terms of content type, as well as the server side administrative forms if you are consuming the Infopart services of SharePoint Server 2013. So all these things you need to take care while you are migrating your custom workflows to the newer version of SharePoint 2013, because this could lead you to the some unwanted and unacceptable scenarios where your workflows will keep crashing, and sometimes you will not identify the what are the exact issues are going on into the system. The third challenge, basically, if you are consuming the third-party workflows and you need to ensure the compatibility with your SharePoint environment while you are migrating, because sometimes the scenarios can occur like if you are consuming the Nintex workflows 2010 and you are working with the SharePoint 2010. So in that case, while you are migrating your SharePoint site to the 2013, so it is important that you need to ensure the compatibility of Nintex workflow 2013 with it, because sometimes the minor versions have been responsible to not bringing up the good compatibility and lead to the some unwanted and messy scenarios into the applications, and the workflows not work properly, and like you may have the crash situation could be occurred and can be reported by your business users. So these are the things to be taken care, and the challenges that you may face during the migration. So these are all you need to consider this all the stuffs into all the aspects, and based on that you need to mitigate them. Moving further with an approach to workflow migration, particularly while you are having the Visual Studio in case, like if we had to talk about the code-based solutions. Now here I would like to say the method, or you can say the sure steps you can consider, that is responsible for migrating any SharePoint custom solution from Visual Studio 2010 to Visual Studio 2012. Means if you consider the first 4 points, there are general use purpose for any SharePoint custom solution, and the fifth one is just your step particularly for the workflow migration. So again, we'll start with the step 1. So you need to consider the SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013 GAC locations. Why? Because SharePoint 2010 is built based on the .NET Framework 3.5, and your SharePoint 2013 is built on the .NET Framework 4.5. As the .NET Framework 4.5 is having the GAC location is being hosted from the different location of your file system. So you need to consider that whenever you deploy your application, so it should consider the 2013 GAC location. So that means it should consider the .NET Framework 4.5 GAC location instead of .NET Framework 3.5. After that, while you are upgrading your Visual Studio solution, you need to modify your CSproj file first. So you need to open the CSproj file in any of the editor. The best one is the Notepad, and over where you need to find out the tag called as a target framework version, and set the value to v4.5. If you look at the existing value, the value would be v3.5. So basically it's targeting the framework of your .NET, that is 3.5, and you need to move to the 4.5. Similarly, you need to inject one more tag, that is the target office version, and it has to the value to be 15.0. Along with that, you need to also modify the package designer, and there is a tag you will find out that is called the package itself, and along with that you need to add additional attribute which should indicate the SharePoint product version 15.0. So as an attribute, you need to write down the SharePoint product version and set the value to the 15.0. After doing that, you just need to reload your project, let the project to be updated with the other respect of the changing the references into your project solution, and then after you need to just verify that whether all the DLLs related to the SharePoint are now pointing to the SharePoint 15 APIs. So that means it should start looking the APIs and the DLLs to be found into the 15 Hive is API folder instead of 14 Hive is API folder. So these are the very first 4 sure steps to convert your SharePoint solution from Visual Studio 2010 to Visual Studio 2012. Now, if we talk about the workflow migration, so in that case, as I have just mentioned, now SharePoint 2013 workflows are totally built on the .NET Framework 4.5 and Workflow Foundation 4.5. So that means Workflow Foundation of 4.5 version that is only supports the declarative workflows. So that means if you have any custom logic or business logic that has to be switched and put back to the some other way, like the web service or the WCF services. So that means you need to author your complete workflow in a declarative manner, and if you would like to consume the custom code, so for that you need to create a separate web application to host your web services or WCF services from different or same server where the SharePoint is being hosted. And then after, you can consume those web services or WCF services by considering the HTTP web invoke web service activities, and over there you need to configure the web service URL and the response type, as I have just mentioned while we were configuring the SharePoint Designer 2013 workflow activity. So these are the approaches where basically you need to take care in while you are performing the workflow migration using the Visual Studio 2012. Moving to the last topic and the last objective of this webinar, that is the leveraging workflow manager in SharePoint 2013. Now, as I have just mentioned in the earlier of my this webinar, so that is now we have two different components available in SharePoint 2013. So that means your workflows are not going to be longer executed on workflow manager, on the same machine where the SharePoint 2013 is being hosted. You can have a separate machine available and you can host the workflow manager over there to distribute your load. We'll talk much in detail into the upcoming slides. So first of all, let's have a focus on the workflow in SharePoint 2013. So now, as you can see, the two boxes are available with the SharePoint and the Azure workflow. The Azure workflow is nothing but it's a workflow manager. So your SharePoint environment may have your solutions, your content databases in terms of contents, list, libraries, apps, as the SharePoint 2013 also supports the app development, so you can consume the apps as well. You may have your events, event receivers, and the additional component to execute SharePoint 2010 workflows. For that, Workflow Foundation 3.0, the host is available. If you consider the object model, particularly for the workflow services, so all the workflow service manager exists on SharePoint server, especially for the SharePoint 2010. It is responsible for deploying your workflows, messaging, instances, and Interop of SharePoint 2010. And along with that, if you just notice that just at the bottom of the stack, that is Azure Workflow Service application proxies exist. It's nothing but it's just consuming the service which is been hosted from the Workflow Manager. So if we move to the another box, so Workflow Manager is there, which is considering your workflow as a Azure workflow, and your messages are getting requested and passed as a response by the Azure Service Bus. So your events will be sent to your workflow manager, and the response will be carried out through the REST calls. In between these two, establishing these two channels, like there is a OAuth 2 authentication mechanism take place, and OAuth token will be passed between these two entities. The OAuth will basically consider the application ID, so it is easier for SharePoint instance to identify the workflow instance, and the user context will be also passed to identify that the initiator of the workflow. And to deal with this SharePoint 2013 and the workflow, so two tools are basically responsible in it to author the workflows, that is the Visual Studio and the SharePoint Designer 2013. So this is what the overall mechanism exists into the workflow, particularly in case of workflow with SharePoint 2013. In terms of workflow platform, as I have just explained, so Workflow Manager is basically built on the .NET Framework 4.5 and the Windows Workflow Foundation. So that means here there is no such limitations in terms of hosting the workflows. So that means the Workflow Manager is not limited to the SharePoint 2013. So it is not only hosting and executing and processing the SharePoint 2013 workflows, but it can be scaled to the other levels as well. So like your single workflow can serve for SharePoint, for your web application, and for your Windows application as well. Coming into the quite detail and some few points we would like to discuss, like in terms of workflows in SharePoint 2013. So basically the workflows been now processing move to the workflow manager. So that means your workflows are not will be executed anymore on the same machine where the SharePoint 2013 is being hosted. You need the workflow manager to be hosted and to be worked and installed on the separate machine. But it is not the ideal scenario if we need to consider the resource costing in terms of hardware infrastructure. So for the testing, development, and the staging purpose, you may have the scenario where you can install the SharePoint 2013 and workflow manager on the same machine. But it is recommended that for the production, you should separate out the SharePoint 2013 and the workflow manager on two different separate machines. SharePoint farm and the workflow manager farm can be on the same or different servers, as I have just mentioned. Now whatever the code that you will write for the workflow, so basically they have been into the XAML format. So if you can recall, the earlier the workflows basically been authored in a XOML format. So now the declarative workflows have been considered, and so for that the XAML format is been considered. So that means you can write your workflow in as a visual through Visual Designer, as well as you can write down the tags for the workflow and configure them as a text base as well. Overall, in the workflows in the SharePoint 2013 improves the stability, scalability, and puts the transparency. As I have mentioned, that it is not limited to the only SharePoint 13 workflows. It can be referred and can be used as other technologies of Microsoft as well, like Windows application and the web application. The workflow manager basically in terms of SharePoint 2013, so it only uses that platform where the new workflow manager service is available and which is always been connected with throughout the single farm. Overall, it is built upon the workflow foundation, and Windows Workflow Foundation is basically the part of the .NET Framework 4.5. SharePoint Server 2013 uses the workflow manager for its workflow engine. So like your workflow manager is a very important component in terms of SharePoint Server 2013 workflows, because if you want like to run the SharePoint 13 workflows, you must need to install the workflow manager, and based on that you will get the workflow engine to be run and execute and host your workflows from the machine. In terms of capabilities of the workflow manager, so you have a couple of the capabilities: high density and the multi-tenancy. As we all know that the SharePoint is supporting the multi-tenancy, so here your workflow manager is also supporting the multi-tenancy. Elastic scale, activity and workflow artifact management, so basically it maintains the history of workflow execution and whatever the activity outcome of it. The track and monitoring, so you can consider the workflow history list. Instance management for your various and different workflows and their instances. Fully declarative authoring, REST and service bus messaging is available to exchange the information with SharePoint and the workflow manager itself. And the managed service reliability is available as it is being hosted and served through WCF service and their proxy objects. We would like to discuss the few architectural changes will happen with the workflow structure in SharePoint. So it clearly says that your SharePoint Server 2010 and SharePoint Server 2013 are identical, but just additional component is been attached with SharePoint Server 2013, that is the workflow manager. So your basically your workflow manager can be hosted on the separate or same machine. It may need a Windows separate server and SQL server as well. So you may have the scenario like you can distinct and differentiate the two different SQL servers where your content database is basically served for the SharePoint Server 2013, and for the workflow manager you can have your SQL server separately can be available, but make sure that both should be connected as on a single farm. So that means should have the common activity and the connectivity to be ensured. Basically it communicates with the SharePoint using the Azure Service Bus based on the common protocols like HTTP, and if you have the kind of a security is the constraint, so it can be also consumed through HTTPS as well. SharePoint events basically are routed to the workflow manager, so whatever the events will be happen on the SharePoint in terms of workflow, so all the events will be routed to the workflow manager, and the response will be basically retrieved through the REST API in form of JSON. So here we are ending our complete presentation, and we are starting the question and answer sessions for 10 minutes. So guys, you feel free to ask your questions regarding to migration and workflow migration strategies and any queries you do have.
Thank you all for the interactive session. So I hope you all enjoyed the session. So for further queries, or if you need any service in SharePoint or any other Microsoft technology or mobile technology or any IT services, you can shoot us email at inquiry@cygnet-infotech.com. And we got our next webinar next week for SEO best practices for 2013. Please join us for the same, and stay tuned for further SharePoint webinars as well for other webinars with our website. So we will be announcing the SharePoint series webinar soon. Thank you all. Thanks a lot for your time. Have a nice day.